its superheated wake leaving afterimages burned across his retinas. Wrong trajectory. Wrong intensity. The modified training weapon shouldn't have fired with anywhere near that power level. Someone had miscalculated their sabotage. Across the simulation chamber, Tynix pressed herself against emergency barriers that hummed with barely contained energy. Her dark eyes, those impossibly large, luminous eyes that seemed to hold depths of starlight, were wide with a terror he'd never seen during months of tactical exercises. The Zenthari were creatures of precision and calculation. Chaos was their natural enemy. But chaos, Alvin had learned long ago in the burning wreckage of the Cresven Nebula, was where humans found their edge. Emergency klaxons shrieked through Brentham Academy's premier training facility, their piercing wails mixing with the electrical sizzle of damaged systems. Red warning lights bathed everything in hellish crimson, transforming familiar training equipment into menacing silhouettes that danced with each pulse of illumination. The exit doors had sealed, but that was standard lockdown protocol. What wasn't standard was the communication dead zone that had settled over their section of the facility like a suffocating blanket. Professional-grade jamming. This wasn't random equipment failure. Move. The word exploded from his throat as another plasma burst, weaker than the first, but still potentially lethal, vaporized a section of wall near Tynix's position. He launched himself across the chamber in a combat roll that brought him up beside her, his larger frame providing cover from the weapon's erratic targeting systems. The heat radiating from his body surprised her. Not fever, but the warmth that came from a metabolism designed for stress response. Where her species regulated temperature with careful efficiency, humans seemed to burn hotter when threatened. His presence beside her felt like standing near a contained furnace. How are you navigating their targeting patterns? Her voice carried that musical quality that made even urgent questions sound like carefully composed poetry. But underneath the melody, he heard something else. Professional curiosity mixed with growing admiration. Pattern recognition. 20 years of people trying to kill me teaches you to read weapon systems. The plasma emplacements continued their deadly sweeps. But their firing sequences were degrading as whatever sabotage had been applied began cascading through their control systems. Alvin's trained eye cataloged the deterioration, power fluctuations, timing irregularities, targeting drift. Someone had planned a subtle disruption that had gone catastrophically wrong. They wanted a minor malfunction for cover, got a potential massacre instead. Tynix studied his profile as he analyzed their situation, noting the way his jaw tightened with what she initially mistook for fear. Only gradually did she realize her error. The expression wasn't terror. It was the focused intensity of a predator, calculating the movements of prey. Her people had extensive psychological profiles on human military personnel, but the clinical descriptions hadn't prepared her for witnessing the transformation firsthand. In classroom settings, Instructor Alvin was patient, methodical, even gentle. Here, with death painting luminous tracks through the air around them, something primal had sharpened behind his eyes. Professional infiltration. They're using our crisis as cover, but they didn't plan on nearly killing us. The thought sent ice through her veins despite the waves of heat radiating from his body. Brentham Academy housed some of the galaxy's most sensitive military intelligence. If hostile forces were exploiting their crisis for espionage operations. His combat-trained hearing caught something she'd missed, the subtle change in air pressure that indicated the facility's blast doors cycling somewhere in the distance. Security forces were mobilizing, but they'd be dealing with multiple system failures and communication blackouts. The infiltrators had bought themselves time, just not in the way they'd planned. The next weapon cycle would give them several seconds to reach maintenance access, assuming the degrading systems didn't shift pattern again. Alvin counted down the timing in his head, every heartbeat measured against the rhythm of destruction above them. But the pattern did shift. The weapons targeting computers, damaged by cascading failures, began firing in sequence rather than coordination. Instead of a clear window, they now faced continuous crossfire. Later, she would try to analyze his decision-making process. Her people were masters of tactical calculation, capable of processing multiple variables with computer-like accuracy. But no algorithm could explain how he'd assessed the new firing pattern, calculated trajectory windows, and identified a path through continuous plasma fire in the space of 3 heartbeats. He simply adapted. His arms circled her waist, lifting her smaller frame against his chest, as he began a sprint that wove between plasma bolts with margins measured in centimeters. Each step placed them exactly where the weapons weren't firing, a deadly dance choreographed by experience and instinct working in perfect synchronization. They dove into the maintenance alcove as superheated air scorched the space they'd just vacated. Tynix found herself pressed against the solid warmth of his chest, breathing air that tasted of ozone and something indefinably male. For a moment, the universe contracted to this single point of contact between their bodies. How did you calculate that trajectory? I didn't calculate. His breathing showed the strain of their desperate sprint, human physiology pushed to its limits. I felt the pattern. 20 years of staying alive teaches you to read chaos. The concept was alien to her structured mind. Zenthari military doctrine emphasized mathematical precision and systematic analysis. Humans, apparently, operated on something far more primitive and infinitely more adaptable: battlefield intuition. Alvin accessed the maintenance panel with hands that moved quickly but carefully, no wasted motion, but none of the superhuman speed she'd imagined in the heat of crisis. His fingers worked across interfaces he'd helped design, but the sabotage had affected more systems than anticipated. The weapons drew power through supposedly independent feeds, but someone had cleverly cross-linked their control systems to create cascading failures. What should have been a minor disruption had turned into a facility-wide crisis. He could work with that. Your approach to systems integration. She paused, watching him bypass damaged pathways and reroute connections through backup channels. It's remarkably adaptive, more like desperately improvised. Half these circuits are fried from the overloads, but he was making progress. Where textbook procedures would have required extensive diagnostics and careful analysis, his experience with field repairs under pressure allowed him to identify functional pathways and jury-rig solutions that shouldn't have worked. The feedback loop he introduced into the weapons network was elegant in its simplicity, using the saboteurs' own cross-linked systems against them. Instead of fighting the cascade failures, he redirected them to target the weapons' coordination protocols. Sparks flew from control nodes as targeting computers began receiving contradictory commands. Power fluctuations rippled through the network as the weapons struggled with increasingly impossible firing solutions. One by one, the plasma emplacements powered down to prevent permanent damage. The chamber settled into blessed quiet, broken only by the steady drip of coolant from damaged systems and the whisper of recycled air through ventilation grills. Emergency lighting continued its rhythmic pulse, painting their faces in alternating patterns of crimson and shadow. In the sudden stillness, Tynix became acutely aware of their proximity. The maintenance alcove barely accommodated 2 occupants, leaving them pressed together in intimate contact. She could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her shoulder, elevated but controlled, the physiological signature of someone accustomed to functioning under extreme stress. Your stress response is remarkably controlled for the circumstances. Combat conditioning. You learn to channel adrenaline instead of fighting it. Her people had theories about human physiological adaptations to conflict, but witnessing the reality was profoundly different from reading clinical studies, where her species would be flooded with stress hormones that impaired cognitive function. He seemed to have achieved a state of enhanced focus that improved rather than hindered his capabilities. It was, she realized, what made them such effective survivors. The sealed exit doors confirmed his suspicions about the broader situation. Professional-grade electronic warfare was suppressing Academy communications, while infiltrators operated elsewhere in the facility. Security forces would be responding, but they'd be dealing with multiple system failures and coordination difficulties. We need to reach the main security center and provide direct intelligence on the situation. Standard access routes will be compromised by the same jamming affecting our communications. Then, we use routes they won't expect. He called up facility schematics on the maintenance terminal, his eyes tracking service passages and utility corridors with practiced efficiency. Military engineers learned to think about infrastructure, but combat veterans learned to think about how that infrastructure could be exploited. Environmental systems routing connects directly to security levels. We can reach command through atmospheric processing tunnels. Those passages weren't designed for personnel transit. The dimensions alone would make movement extremely challenging. Challenging, but not impossible. There was something in the way he said it that made her pulse quicken. A confidence born of experience rather than theory, treating obstacles as problems to be solved rather than barriers to be avoided. She was beginning to understand why Zenthari military academies included extensive courses on human tactical psychology. You didn't study a species this thoroughly unless you recognized their potential for dangerous innovation. The service access required override codes that weren't part of standard cadet training. Alvin entered them from memory, but she noticed his hesitation at several points. These weren't codes he used regularly, but ones he'd memorized during his engineering rotation years ago. Military engineering background. I helped update some of these systems during the consortium expansion. The casual mention of her species' most significant recent conflict sent a chill through her. She'd studied the consortium expansion as historical analysis, but the realization that her instructor had been personally involved in those campaigns cast his capabilities in an entirely different light. No wonder he navigated crisis situations with such composed intensity. He'd been tested in conflicts that had reshaped galactic power structures. The service tunnels were cramped, poorly lit spaces filled with the hum of circulation systems and the whisper of processed atmosphere. Emergency lighting provided minimal illumination, casting everything in pools of pale radiance separated by stretches of near darkness. Alvin moved through the narrow passages with careful efficiency, his larger frame adapting to constraints through practiced technique rather than impossible grace. She could see the strain it required. This wasn't effortless, but it was manageable through experience and determination. Your movement suggests extensive confined space training. Special operations rotation. You learn to use whatever mobility the environment allows. Behind him, she found the passages challenging despite her species' natural advantages in confined spaces. His steady pace and confident navigation kept them moving, but she could see the physical effort it required. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he maneuvered through particularly tight sections. This was competence, not superhuman ability. Vibrations through the tunnel walls indicated heavy equipment operation somewhere above them. The patterns were wrong for normal academy functions, suggesting external forces were accessing critical infrastructure during the crisis. They're definitely using our emergency as operational cover. Confirmed. Question is scope and timeline before security containment becomes effective. At a junction in the tunnel system, Alvin paused to check his mental map against the schematic display. Multiple routes led toward the security center, but his choice surprised her. Instead of the most direct path, he selected an approach that would take them near the Academy's central data processing facility. That routing increases transit time significantly. It also provides intelligence-gathering opportunities on their actual objectives. The tactical logic was sound, but it required accepting additional risk for broader strategic benefits. Tynex realized that her instructor's approach to their crisis extended beyond immediate survival toward active countermeasures. He wasn't just escaping. He was positioning for engagement. The central processing facility was a technological cathedral, its vaulted spaces filled with the harmonic resonance of massive computational arrays. Towers of servers stretched toward a ceiling lost in shadows, their status indicators creating constellations of colored light that pulsed with information flow. Emergency lighting cast long shadows between the processing banks, transforming the familiar space into a maze of concealment and observation points. The air itself vibrated with electromagnetic energy, raising fine hairs along her arms and making her skin tingle with static charge. Movement ahead confirmed they weren't alone. 3 figures in tactical gear were accessing main terminals with methodical efficiency, their equipment and coordination indicating professional training. They were extracting massive amounts of data from the Academy's central systems while monitoring security frequencies and maintaining perimeter observation. These weren't random criminals. This was military-grade espionage. Alvin studied their positions and equipment with professional interest. Advanced electronic warfare gear, sophisticated data extraction systems, coordinated overwatch procedures. Their operational planning was thorough, and their execution was competent. This was going to be significantly more challenging than broken weapons and environmental systems. 3 hostiles, professional-grade equipment and procedures, active electronic warfare capabilities. We need to alert security before they complete extraction and withdraw. Tynex stared at the tactical situation with growing concern. 3 trained operatives with superior equipment and positioning, operating in familiar territory with active countermeasures. The mathematics were heavily against them. Your assessment of engagement possibilities. Direct confrontation would be inadvisable, but we have advantages they can't counter. His confidence wasn't the reckless bravado she'd read about in human psychological profiles. This was calculated assessment based on asymmetric tactical thinking, identifying advantages that weren't apparent from conventional analysis. Environmental systems access gives us facility-wide influence over their operational conditions. If we can degrade their working environment systematically, we might force acceleration of their timeline. That assumes their equipment isn't hardened against environmental manipulation. Only one way to find out. From concealment, they observed the infiltrators' procedures while Alvin developed his approach. Unlike the maintenance systems he'd dealt with earlier, the environmental controls required careful coordination across multiple subsystems. One mistake would alert them to the sabotage attempt. His first intervention was subtle, slight temperature elevation in their working area, just enough to require additional cooling for their sensitive electronics. The infiltrators adapted by adjusting their equipment settings, indicating environmental hardening but not complete immunity. Promising, but they're prepared for basic thermal countermeasures. The next escalation involved humidity fluctuations that created condensation issues for optical equipment, while remaining within normal facility parameters. The infiltrators countered with dehumidification units, but their operational efficiency decreased as they dealt with environmental management. They're adapting, but it's costing them resources and attention. Over the next 20 minutes, Alvin systematically degraded their working conditions through multiple environmental vectors: atmospheric pressure variations, electromagnetic interference, vibration frequencies that disrupted fine motor control. Each intervention was subtle enough to avoid immediate detection, while cumulatively making precision work increasingly difficult. The infiltrators responded with professional countermeasures, but their extraction timeline extended as they dealt with equipment issues and reduced operational efficiency. Their communications increased as they coordinated responses to the environmental harassment, which gave Alvin the intelligence he'd been hoping for. Their communications indicate extraction window closing in 15 minutes. Security containment is tightening faster than they anticipated. The infiltrators were feeling pressure from multiple directions: environmental sabotage, equipment difficulties, and approaching security response. Their operational coordination was beginning to show strain as they tried to balance extraction priorities with countermeasure requirements. Time for escalation. Alvin's next intervention targeted their electronic warfare systems directly: power fluctuations designed to stress their jamming equipment without causing obvious failures. The technique required precise timing and careful calibration, but his engineering background provided the technical knowledge necessary. The infiltrators' communications jamming began showing intermittent gaps as their equipment struggled with power irregularities. Brief windows of Academy communications started penetrating their electronic warfare screen. Tynix monitored security frequencies during the communication windows, confirming that response teams were mobilizing throughout the facility. The infiltrators' electronic countermeasures were degrading faster than they could compensate. Security forces have established facility perimeter and are conducting systematic clearance operations. Their extraction window is closing rapidly. The infiltrators reached the same conclusion. Their data extraction accelerated as they prioritized critical intelligence over comprehensive collection. Their operational discipline remained good, but they were clearly working under increasing pressure. Alvin's systematic harassment had achieved its objective, forcing them to choose between thorough extraction and successful withdrawal. The environmental warfare hadn't incapacitated them, but it had degraded their capabilities enough to disrupt their timeline. Now came the dangerous part. I'm going to compromise their extraction route while you maintain observation and coordinate with security forces when communications stabilize. That requires direct engagement with professionally trained operatives. Not direct engagement. Route denial. His approach was methodical and patient. Instead of confronting the infiltrators directly, he began systematically compromising their planned withdrawal by accessing security systems they'd bypassed and sealing corridors they'd left open for extraction. The infiltrators detected the route denial quickly, but their response options were limited. They could fight through security barriers, abandon their extraction plan, or accelerate their timeline even further. They chose acceleration. Data extraction shifted into emergency mode as they prioritized the most critical intelligence. Their coordination tightened as they prepared for rapid withdrawal through compromised routes. Professional discipline kept them focused, but the stress was evident in their increased communication frequency and movement patterns. Security communications cleared completely as the infiltrators' jamming equipment finally succumbed to sustained power irregularities. Academy response teams coordinated systematic closure of all facility access points, while tactical teams prepared for engagement. The infiltrators' extraction window had closed. Their final gambit was predictable: attempt to fight through security containment using their superior equipment and training. But their operational effectiveness had been degraded by 20 minutes of environmental harassment and route denial. When security forces engaged them, The infiltrators were dealing with equipment issues, compromised escape routes, and the accumulated stress of systematic sabotage. Their surrender came after brief resistance that demonstrated professional competence without the overwhelming advantages they'd possessed at the operation's beginning. Academy Security secured the data extraction equipment and confirmed that intelligence compromise had been minimal. The infiltrators' mission had failed not through dramatic confrontation, but through systematic degradation of their operational capabilities. Alvin and Tynix emerged from concealment as security teams conducted post-incident procedures. The crisis that had begun with sabotaged weapons had ended with the capture of professional intelligence operatives and the protection of sensitive Academy data. Your tactical approach was remarkably effective, Instructor. The environmental warfare concept demonstrated sophisticated understanding of asymmetric engagement principles. Standard counterinfiltration techniques. Nothing remarkable about using available resources to create tactical advantages, but that was precisely what made it remarkable. The patient application of systematic pressure that had turned their facility knowledge into a decisive advantage. The willingness to engage superior forces through indirect methods that leveraged environmental control over direct confrontation. My people study human tactical doctrines extensively. Witnessing practical application provides significant insight into your species' strategic capabilities. There was something in her voice, a breathless quality that hadn't been present during their earlier academic interactions. Professional admiration mixed with something more personal. Recognition that the gentle instructor she'd known was also something far more dangerous and competent. As they walked through academy corridors while security teams completed their operations, Tynix found herself acutely aware of the man beside her. Crisis had revealed capabilities that classroom settings couldn't demonstrate: tactical patience, adaptive problem-solving, and the kind of persistent competence that transformed impossible situations into manageable challenges. The dichotomy was fascinating and profoundly attractive. Your recommendation for my continued tactical development: learn to think like a human when conventional approaches prove insufficient. His words carried implications beyond simple military advice. Your people excel at systematic analysis. Humans excel at adaptive improvisation. Integration of both methodologies creates capabilities exceeding either alone. She considered this as they submitted to debriefing procedures, understanding that the day's events had provided education impossible to replicate through simulation. The unpredictable nature of actual crisis situations revealed both capabilities and limitations that controlled exercises couldn't test. For Tynix, the experience had demonstrated why human military personnel commanded such respect throughout the galaxy. Not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through persistent adaptability that turned any environment into potential tactical advantage. For Alvin, the incident had confirmed his assessment of promising alien cadets. They could learn to integrate human tactical flexibility with their species' analytical precision, creating hybrid approaches that enhanced both methodologies. But beyond tactical implications, something else had evolved during their shared crisis. The professional relationship between instructor and student had transformed into recognition of mutual capability that transcended species boundaries and academic protocols. As evening light filtered through academy windows, painting corridors in shades of amber and gold, they found themselves lingering in the aftermath of shared danger. Formal debriefing was complete, reports filed, lessons documented for future training integration. Yet neither seemed eager to return to the structured routine of academic schedules. The incident will influence academy protocols for years to come. Tynix's words carried layers of meaning beyond their surface content. Some lessons can't be taught through simulation. His response acknowledged implications that extended beyond military education. She studied his profile in the golden afternoon light, noting details she'd been too professional to observe during academic interactions. The way shadows played across features that seemed designed for purposes more complex than instruction. The quiet confidence that came from surviving situations others might not. Your background in special operations and military engineering. She paused, gathering courage for a question that ventured beyond appropriate professional boundaries. Was the academy assignment voluntary? They needed someone who understood both theoretical frameworks and practical application. His answer was diplomatically neutral, but something in his expression suggested deeper truths. Sometimes the most effective education comes from instructors who have learned lessons through direct experience. The corridor stretched before them, empty save for the play of light and shadow through tall windows. Other faculty and students had departed for evening schedules, leaving them alone in the gathering dusk. Will you continue teaching? Depends on whether I find students worth the challenge. Their eyes met in the fading light, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. Not the predatory calculation she'd witnessed during crisis, but something warmer, more personal, human and dangerous, patient and competent, teacher and warrior. The academy would analyze the day's events, incorporate lessons learned, update security protocols and training procedures. But the most significant education had already occurred in the space between crisis and resolution, where two people had discovered capabilities in themselves and each other that transcended the boundaries of species and protocol. Some lessons, indeed, couldn't be taught through simulation. They emerged from moments when survival required trust, when impossible odds demanded innovative solutions, and when the careful distance between instructor and student dissolved under the weight of shared danger and mutual respect. As they finally walked toward the dining facilities, neither spoke of what had changed between them. Some transformations required time and reflection to fully understand their implications, but in the gathering dusk of Brentham Academy, surrounded by the golden light of a setting sun, they both understood that their relationship had evolved beyond the simple categories of teacher and student into something far more complex and infinitely more significant. The galaxy was filled with species that had developed sophisticated military doctrines and strategic capabilities. But humans possessed something additional, the willingness to transform any situation into tactical opportunity through persistent adaptation, and the kind of calculated patience that made other species reconsider their assumptions about human potential. That was the lesson she would carry into her military career, and perhaps, if circumstances permitted, into other aspects of her life as well. The future stretched before them like the academy corridors, long, filled with possibility, and illuminated by light that painted everything in shades of gold and promise. Some stories ended with dramatic victories and explosive resolutions. Others ended with the quiet recognition that something profound had begun, requiring patience and time to reach its ultimate significance. This was the latter kind of story, and perhaps, in its own way, the more meaningful for being so.